Hi guys, let's read about the international issues and bilateral relations section of the 12th series of ALS Current Affairs 2019-2020. So the first topic in this section would be India chairs whose executive board. So why was this in the news? India assumed the chair of the World Health Organization's Executive Board on May 22, 2020. It will hold the chairmanship of the Executive Board for the next 1 year, that is from May 2020 to May 2021. Earlier, the chairmanship was held by Japan. Key points. The proposal to appoint India's nominee to the executive board was signed by the 194 nation at the 73rd World Health Assembly between 18 to 19 May 2020. In 2019, whose Southeast Asia group had unanimously decided that India would be elected to the executive board for a 3-year term beginning from May 2020. The WHO member states are grouped into 6 WHO regions, namely African region, number 1. Then number 2, we have region of the Americas. Number 3, Southeast Asia region. Number 4, European region. Number 5, Eastern Mediterranean region. And number 6, Western Pacific region. India has been elected along with 10 other countries including Botswana, Colombia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Madagascar, Oman, Republic of Korea, Russia and the United Kingdom. WHO Executive Board. Composition. The Executive Board is composed of 34 individuals technically qualified in the field of health, each one designated by a member state elected to do so by the World Health Assembly. Member states are elected for 3-year terms. Chairman. The chairman's post is held by rotation for 1 year among regional groups. It is not a full-time assignment and the chairman is just required to chair the executive board's meetings. Meetings. The board meets at least twice a year. Functions. The main functions of the executive board are to give effect to the decisions and policies of the World Health Assembly, to advise it, and generally to facilitate its work. Now let's come to the next topic, that is Daimar Bhasha Dam. So why was this in the news? Pakistan has recently signed a contract with a joint venture of a China Power, Chinese state-run firm, and the Frontier Works Organization (FWO), a commercial arm of Pakistan's military, for the construction of the Daimar Bhasha Dam. So Pakistan has recently signed a contract with a joint venture of a China Power and the Frontier Works Organization for the construction of the Daimar Bhasa Dam. It is located on the Indus River in northern Pakistan between Kohistan district in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Daimar district in Gilgit-Baltistan. So it is located in the Indus River in northern Pakistan between Kohistan district in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Daimar district in Gilgit-Baltistan. It covers construction of a diversion system, main dam access bridge and the 21 megawatt Tangar Tangir hydropower project. So it covers construction of a diversion system, main dam, access bridge, and the 21 megawatt Tangir hydropower project. So here we can see India, this is Afghanistan, then here is Pakistan, Indus River is flowing. Then there is Daimar Bhasha Dam site, Nanga Parvat, then Muhammad Dam site. Okay, this is Islamabad. It will have a gross storage capacity of 8.1 million acre-feet. MAF and power generation capacity of 4,500 megawatt. It will be the tallest roller compact concrete (RCC) dam. It will be the tallest roller compact concrete dam in the world, with the height of 272 meters. The project is designed to serve as the main storage dam of the country, besides Mangla and Tarbela dams. It will help alleviate acute irrigation shortage in the Indus Basin irrigation system. The project was approved in 2010, but it suffered delays because international landing agencies backtracked due to the opposition from India, as a major part of the dam is located in Gilgit-Baltistan, one of the disputed territories of India, and it will cause unrest in the region. India's opposition. The Gilgit-Baltistan region is part of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir that was illegally occupied by Pakistan. It has consistently conveyed her protest and shared concerns and it has shared concerns with both China and Pakistan on all such projects in the Indian territories under Pakistan's illegal occupation. Now let's come to the next topic, that is G7 summit. So why was this in the news? The USA President Donald Trump on 30th May 2020 suggested the postponement of the 46th G7, that is the Group of Seven summit, which was scheduled to be held in June 2020 at Camp David in USA. The G7, or the Group of Seven, is a group of 7 countries that are the world's most industrialized and developed economies, and these are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It is an intergovernmental organization that was formed in 1975 by the top economies of the time as an informal forum to discuss the global economic crisis. Canada joined the group in 1976, and the European Union began attending the meetings from 1977. The G7 was earlier known as the G8 for several years after the original 7 were joined by Russia in 1997, but the group returned to being called G7 after Russia was expelled as a member in 2014, following the latest annexation of the Crimea region of Ukraine. The group regards itself as a community of values with freedom and human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and prosperity and sustainable development as its key principles. Each member nation takes over the G7 presidency for a year on a rotational basis and hosts the annual centerpiece 2-day summit meeting, and it invites other non-G7 leaders to attend the annual summit. The G7 does not have a formal constitution or a fixed headquarters, and the decisions taken by leaders during annual summits are non-binding. What does the G7 do? The G7 was formed initially to discuss economic and political concerns prompted by the 1973 oil crisis, when members of the Organization of Petroleum Export Countries (OPEC) increased the price of oil and cut global supplies to countries. Since then, the group has expanded its area to cover a large number of international issues, including energy security, trade, climate change, terrorism, global health issues, gender equality, poverty, and any other topic the country holding the G7 presidency chooses to put on the agenda. Is the G7 effective? Though criticized as an artifact of a bygone era, but the G7 points to a number of successes, including helping to launch a global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. It also claims to have been a driving force behind the implementation of the 2016 Paris Climate Agreement, though the United States has given the withdrawal notice from that. What challenges does the G7 face? Internally, the G7 has had a number of disagreements. Most recently, when President Trump clashed with other members over taxes on imports and action on climate change at a summit in Canada. The organization has also been criticized for not reflecting the current state of global politics or economics. The rise of India, China, and Brazil over the past few decades has reduced the G7's relevance, whose share in global GDP has now fallen to around 40%. Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries (OPEC). The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, that is the OPEC, is an intergovernmental organization of 13 nations, founded in 1960 in Baghdad by the first 5 members, that is Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, and headquartered since 1965 in Vienna, Austria. As of September 2018, the 13 member countries accounted for an estimated 44% of global oil production, giving OPEC a major influence on global oil prices that were previously determined by the so-called Seven Sisters grouping of multinational oil companies. A larger group called OPEC Plus was formed in late 2016 to have more control over the global crude oil market. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the demand for OPEC oil has fallen to a 30-year low in the second quarter of 2020. Now let's come to the next topic, that is Open Skies Treaty. So why was this in the news? Recently, the United States announced that it will exit the Open Skies Treaty (OST) due to continuous violation of the treaty by Russia and changes in the security environment. It is expected to formally pull out of Open Skies in 6 months. USA's stand. USA's stand. The USA has blamed Russia for restricting US flyovers in neighbor Georgia and its military enclave in Kaliningrad, Russia. So the USA has blamed Russia for restricting US flyovers in neighbor Georgia and its military enclave in Kaliningrad, which is in Russia. So Russia misused its flights over the US and Europe to identify critical infrastructure for potential attack in a time of war. Russia intends to annex the Crimea Peninsula and has designated an open skies refueling airfield in the region. Yet the USA has expressed willingness to make a new agreement. Russia's stand. Russia has denied the allegations and warned that the withdrawal will affect the interest of all of 35 participating countries. However, Russia intended to fully follow all the rights and obligations under the treaty as long as the treaty is in force. It can be noted that the USA has used the treaty more intensively than Russia. Between 2002 and 2016, the US flew 196 flights over Russia compared to the 71 flights flown by Russia. This move by the USA has further deepened doubts on extension of the New START Treaty, which expires in February 2021. Throughout its term, the Trump administration has been skeptical of arms control agreement. In 2019, the US and Russia walked away from the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Open Skies Treaty. It was signed in 1992 and came into effect in 2002. It is an agreement that allows its 34 signatories to monitor arms development by conducting surveillance flights unarmed over each other's territories. Therefore, the treaty established an aerial surveillance system for its participants. Both the US and Russia are signatories of the treaty. India is not a member of this treaty. Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was a nuclear arms control accord reached by the United States and the Soviet Union in 1987, in which the two nations agreed to eliminate their stocks of intermediate range and shorter range or medium range hand-based missiles which could carry nuclear warheads. It also covered old land-based missiles, including those carrying nuclear warheads, but did not cover sea-launched missiles. The United States withdrew from the treaty on 2 August 2019. New START Treaty. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, that is START, is a treaty between the United States of America and the Russian Federation on measures for the further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. It entered into force on 5 February 2011. It is a successor to the START framework of 1991. At the end of the Cold War, that limited both sides to 1,600 strategic delivery vehicles and 6,000 warheads. The USA has been worried that extending New START would negatively impact arms deal with China and Russia. It is concerned that China's nuclear stockpile could be doubled if the New START treaty continued as is without including China. The New START treaty also suffered from verification inadequacies and that the US intended to establish a new arms control regime which would include China. Now let's come to the next topic, that is Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So why was this in the news? Egypt on 22nd May 2020 announced that it is willing to resume negotiations with Ethiopia and Sudan concerning the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, or GERD. About the dam is located on River Blue Nile, a tributary of River Nile, in Ethiopia and is the center of a dispute involving several East African countries dependent on the river's waters. Ethiopia began the construction of the GERD in 2011 on the Blue Nile that runs across one part of the country. After completion, the dam hydropower project will be Africa's largest. Egypt and Sudan has objected to the construction of the dam and proposed a longer timeline for the project. The Nile is an important water source in the region, so there are concerns that this dispute may evolve into a full-fledged conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. For the past 4 years, tri-party talks between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan have been unable to reach agreements. Recently, the USA has stepped in to mediate, and also Egypt has announced that it is willing to resume negotiations with Ethiopia and Sudan concerning the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD. River Nile. The Nile is the longest river in the world and is called the father of African rivers. It has a length of about 4,132 miles and drains an area estimated at 1,293,000 square miles. It rises south of the equator and flows northward through northeastern Africa to drain into the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile River the Nile River forms an arcuate delta as it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. So the Nile River forms an arcuate delta as it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Deltas with triangular or fan shape are called arcuate, arc-like deltas. The Nile is formed by three principal streams: the Blue Nile, the Atbara, and the White Nile. So the Nile is formed by three principal streams. Number 1, Blue Nile. Number 2, the Atbara. And number 3, White Nile. Drainage countries. Parts of Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Sudan, and the cultivated part of Egypt. Now let's come to the next topic, that is the New Development Bank. So why was this in the news? The Union Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, attended the Special Board of Governors meeting of the New Development Bank, NDB. through video conference on May 27, 2020. It was proposed at the 4th BRICS Summit in New Delhi 2012 by the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is established to mobilize resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies as well as in developing countries. During the 6th BRICS Summit in Fortaleza 2014. So during the 6th BRICS Summit in Fortaleza 2014, the leaders signed the agreement establishing the new development bank (NDB). It also provides technical assistance for projects to be supported by the NDB and engage in information, cultural, and personal exchanges with the purpose of contributing to the achievement of environmental and social sustainability. In 2018, the new development bank. So in 2018, the new development bank received observer status in the UN General Assembly, establishing a firm basis for active and fruitful cooperation with the United Nations. The main objectives of the NDB operations are: number 1, fostering development of member countries; number 2, supporting economic growth; number 3, promoting competitiveness and facilitating job creation; number 4, building a knowledge-sharing platform among developing countries. It was formerly referred to as BRICS Development Bank and is a multilateral development bank. Its headquarters is in Shanghai, China, and the first regional office of the NDB is in Johannesburg, South Africa. The bank shall have an initial authorized capital of $100 billion, and the initial subscribed capital shall be $50 billion, equally shared among founding members. Now let's come to the next topic, that is D10 Club. So why was this in the news? Britain said that it was pushing the US to form a club of 10 nations that could develop its own 5G technology and reduce dependence on Huawei. The Britain is proposing a D10 club of democratic partners and that groups the G7 nations. So Britain is proposing a D10 club of democratic partners that groups the G7 nations with Australia and the Asian technology leaders South Korea and India. It would include G7 countries, that is UK, US, Italy, Germany, France, Japan, and Canada, plus Australia, South Korea, and India. It is aimed for channeling investments into existing telecommunication companies within the 10 member states. The group aimed to create alternative suppliers of 5G equipment and other technologies to avoid relying on China. Ruling out Huawei, Britain has allowed the Chinese global leader in 5G technology to build up to 35% of the infrastructure necessary to roll out its new speedy data network, but their PM Boris Johnson was reported to have instructed officials to draw up plans to cut Huawei out of the network by 2023 as relations with China soar. But their PM, Boris Johnson, was reported to have instructed officials to draw up plans to cut Huawei out of the network by 2023 as relations with China sour. Now let's come to the next topic, that is China opposes THAAD in South Korea. So, why was this in the news? Recently, China has made objections to the presence of the US THAAD THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. The THAAD stands for Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, a transportable ground-based missile defense system. The THAAD is designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate ballistic missiles in the terminal phase of their approach to a target, and it is alarmed about incoming missiles by space-based satellites with infrared sensors. The THAAD system consists of five major components, namely interceptors, launchers, a radar, a fire control unit, and support equipment. This anti-ballistic missile defense system has been designed and manufactured by the US company Lockheed Martin. South Korea is not the only country with the THAAD missile defense system. It has been previously deployed in the UAE, Guam, Israel, and Romania. South Korea-China controversy over THAAD. In South Korea, the THAAD missile defense system is operated by the US Army, and the US had previously announced that the deployment of this missile defense system was a countermeasure against potential attacks by South Korea, particularly after the country had engaged in testing ballistic missiles. In 2017, matters escalated in the Korean peninsula after North Korea test-fired a few missiles in the direction of US bases in Japan. Following this incident, the US amended its plans and moved the systems to its army base in Osan, South Korea, and this move by the US particularly angered China. Why is China opposing THAAD in South Korea? China's opposition has little to do with the missiles itself and is more about the system's inbuilt advanced radar systems that could track China's actions. The controversy also has much to do with the geopolitics and complex conflicts in East Asia, with the US having a presence in the region, particularly through its many military bases in Japan and South Korea. China believes the US exerts influence over South Korea and Japan and may interfere with Beijing's long-term military, diplomatic, and economic interest in the region. Following the deployment of replacement missiles recently, China has warned the US not to harm bilateral relations between Beijing and Seoul and not to interfere in its national interest. The US and South Korea response in this context. The US and South Korea have consistently maintained that these missiles are only to counter potential threats by North Korea, and South Korea also issued a statement saying the number of missiles had not increased but had only been replaced with newer versions. The next topic is Malabar naval exercise to include Australia. So why was this in the news? India is prepared to expand the Malabar Trilateral naval exercise involving India, the US, and Japan to permanently include Australia. The exercise Malabar is a trilateral naval exercise including the US, Japan, and India as permanent members. Originally begun in 1992 as a bilateral exercise between India and the United States, Japan became a permanent partner in 2015. Past non permanent participants are Australia and Singapore. The annual Malabar series began in 1992 and includes diverse activities ranging from fighter combat operations from aircraft carriers through maritime interdiction operations exercises. Significance of Australia's inclusion. Earlier, India had concerns that it would give the appearance of a quadrilateral military alliance aimed at China. Now both look forward to the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and the strengthening of defense ties. This has led to a convergence of mutual interest in many areas for a better understanding of regional and global issues. Both are expected to conclude the long-pending Mutual Logistics Support Agreement (MLSA) as part of measures to elevate the strategic partnership. Now let's come to the next topic, that is the global economic prospects. So why was this in the news? The World Bank has released its Global Economic Prospects GEP 2020 report. The GEP, that is Global Economic Prospects, is a World Bank Group flagship report that examines global economic developments and prospects with a special focus on emerging market and developing economies. It is issued twice a year in January and June. The January edition includes in-depth analysis of topical policy challenges, while the June edition contains shorter analytical pieces. So the January edition includes in-depth analysis of topical policy challenges, while the June edition contains shorter analytical pieces. In a nutshell, the outlook for the global economy for 2020 has darkened amid slowing activity and heightened downside risk. Number one, on poverty. The scope and speed with which the COVID-19 pandemic and economic shutdowns have devastated the poor around the world are unprecedented in modern times. Current estimates show that 60 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty in 2020. Number two, policy choices. Policy choices made today include greater debt transparency to invite new investment, foster advances in digital connectivity, and a major expansion of cash safety nets for the poor. The financing and building of productive infrastructure are among the hardest to solve development challenges in the post-pandemic recovery. Number three, emerging market and developing economies, EMDEs. EMDEs face health crisis, restrictions, and external shocks like falling trade, tourism, and commodity prices, as well as capital outflows. These countries are expected to have a 3 to 8% output loss in the short term, based on studies of previous pandemics as per the analysis. Growth is likely to slow more in commodity exporting EMDEs than in commodity importing ones. Now let's come to the next topic, that is Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. So, why was this in the news? Senior lawmakers from 8 democracies, including the US, have united to counter communist China. They have launched the Inter Parliamentary Alliance on China (IPAC) on June 5, 2020. IPAC, that is Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. The IPAC is a new cross-parliamentary alliance to help counter the threat posed by China's growing influence on global trade, security, and human rights. The participating nations include the US, Germany, UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, Sweden, Norway, as well as members of the European Parliament. It is an international cross-party group of legislators working towards reform on how democratic countries approach China. Comprised of legislators from 8 democracies, it will be led by a group of co-chairs who are senior politicians drawn from a representative cross-section of the world's major political parties. The group aims to construct appropriate and coordinated responses and to help craft a proactive and strategic approach on issues related to China. Now let's come to the next topic, that is International Religious Freedom Report. So why was this in the news? Recently, the US State Department has released its annual International Religious Freedom (IRF) report 2019. The report emphasized the need to ensure full protection to minorities in India as guaranteed under the Constitution. The report for India, which takes note of events in 2019, mentions the change in the status of Jammu and Kashmir, the Citizenship Amendment Act (CAA), and the National Register of Citizens (NRC). It discusses mob lynching and anti-conversion laws and related issues in details and mentions that issues of religiously inspired mob violence, lynching, and communal violence were sometimes denied or ignored by lawmakers. It mentions some of the inflammatory public remarks or social media posts against minority communities made by some officials of political parties and reports details the incidents of cow vigilantism and other types of mob violence. It mentions the events of the Babri Masjid decision by the Supreme Court and the challenges to the 2018 reversal of a ban on some women entering the Sabarimala temple. India's response. The Indian government has rejected the report by asserting that there is no locus standi for a foreign government to comment on the state of its citizens' constitutionally protected rights as it conflicts the sovereignty of a nation. India regards the accusations as a so India regards the accusations as inaccurate and unwarranted and questioned the body's locus standi in India's internal affairs. India has objected to the Commission's biased and tendentious comments against it. U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom USCIRF. The USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal government commission dedicated to defending the universal right to freedom of religion or belief abroad. It was created by the International Religious Freedom Act IRFA of 1998 with principal responsibilities to review the facts and circumstances of violations of religious freedom internationally. It is an advisory body to the U.S. Congress and it reviews the facts and circumstances of religious freedom violations and makes policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. Now let's come to the next topic, that is India elected as a non-permanent member of United Nations Security Council. India was elected as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council (UNSC) for a 2-year term by winning 184 votes in the 193-member General Assembly on June 17, 2020. Previously, India has been elected as a non-permanent member of the Council for the years 1950 to 1951, 1967 to 1968, 1972 to 1973, 1977 to 1978, 1984 to 85, 1991 to 92, and 2011 to 12. Ireland, Mexico, and Norway were also elected as non-permanent members of the UN Security Council. Key highlights of the recent elections in the Indian context. India's term will begin from January 2021 and priorities will include the effective fight against terror and reformed multilateralism as it aims to boost its status as a major power. The new term will be critical for India as it has been pushing efforts to reform the Security Council and seek permanent membership of the Council. The support for India's permanent membership has been increasing with a number of countries advocating that the current UNSC does not represent the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. India's approach will be guided by 5S as set out by the Prime Minister. Samman, that is respect, Samvad, that is dialogue, Sahayog, that is cooperation, and Santi, that is peace. In order to create conditions for universal samriddhi, that is prosperity. India's overall objective during this tenure in the UN Security Council will be the achievement of norms, NORMS, a new orientation for a reformed multilateral system. Now let's come to UNSC elections. Each year, the General Assembly elects 5 non-permanent members out of 10 in total for a 2-year term. The 10 non-permanent seats are distributed on a regional basis as follows: 5 for African and Asian states, 1 for Eastern European states, 2 for the Latin American and Caribbean states, 2 for Western European and other states. To be elected to the Council, candidate countries need a 2/3 majority of ballots of member states that are present and voting in the Assembly. So they need two-thirds majority of ballots of the member states that are present and voting in the assembly. The Unsc elections were traditionally held in the General Assembly Hall, with each of the 193 member states casting its vote in a separate ballot. The UN General Assembly on June 17 conducted elections for President of the 75th session of the Assembly. 5 non-permanent members of the Security Council and members of the Economic and Social Council under special voting arrangements put in place due to COVID-19 related restrictions. Turkish diplomat and politician Volkan Bozkır was elected as president of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. So Turkish diplomat and politician Volkan Bozkır was elected as president of the 75th as the president of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. Let's come to UN Security Council, UNSC. The United Nations Security Council is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations charged with ensuring international peace and security, recommending the admission of new UN members to the General Assembly and approving any changes to the UN Charter. The Security Council held its first session on 17 January 1946 at Church House, Westminster, London. Since its first meeting, the Security Council has taken permanent residence at the United Nations, headquartered in New York City. The Council is composed of 15 members, 5 permanent members, that is China, France, Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, and 10 non-permanent members elected for 2-year term by the General Assembly with the end of term year. Functions and powers: to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles and purposes of the United Nations, to investigate any dispute or situation which might lead to international friction, to recommend methods of adjusting such disputes or the terms of the settlement. Now let's come to the next topic, that is Universal Periodic Review UPR process. Recently, in its report on human rights in India, the National Human Rights Commission NHRC has informed the United Nations Human Rights Council UNHRC that the center is considering implementing the concept of universal basic income in India. So recently, in its report on human rights in India, the National Human Rights Commission has informed the United Nations Human Rights Council that the center is considering implementing the concept of universal basic income in India. This report was submitted as a part of the 3rd round of the Universal Periodic Review UPR process, which is done every 4.5 years. The report reviewed the implementation of 152 recommendations of the UPR working group that the Indian government had accepted back in September 2017. The report recommended for continue studying the possibility of a universal basic income as a way to further reduce poverty levels with a view to possibly phasing out the existing social protection system in full consultation with all stakeholders. It mentions the issues of ratification of international human rights instruments, issues in legislations of trafficking and protection against child sexual abuse. It states that there has been a consensus on the need for increased budgetary allocation for health and nutrition by the center and state governments. It mentions the works undertaken by the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights on a proposal for a pilot project to eliminate child labor in 5 aspirational districts with high incidence of child labor. It mentions that the NHRC is in the process of setting up a committee to monitor the implementation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It mentions the recommendations of holistic inclusion of NHRC to the MHRD in order to make education more accessible to children with disabilities. The NHRC in the report mentions about concern over the inefficiencies in implementation of the Scheduled Caste or Scheduled Tribe Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989 and the rules of 1995, and warned states of coercive action when they fail to submit reports on human rights violations of SCs, STs, and minorities. Universal Basic Income. A basic income is a regular, periodic cash payment delivered unconditionally to all citizens on an individual basis without the requirement of work or willingness to work. The UBI has 3 components: universality, all citizens included; unconditionality, no prior condition; and agency, by providing support in the form of cash transfers to respect, not dictate, recipients' choices. Universal Periodic Review UPR. It is a unique process which involves a review of the human rights records of all the UN member states. The UPR is a state driven process under the auspices of the Human Rights Council, which provides the opportunity for each state to declare what actions they have taken to improve the human rights situations in their countries and to fulfill their human rights obligations. NHRC. It is an independent statutory body established on 12 October 1993 as per provisions of Protection of Human Rights Act 1993, later amended in 2006, and has been established in conformity with the Paris Principles endorsed by the General Assembly of the United Nations by its Regulations 48/134. It plays 4 key roles, namely protector, advisor, monitor, and educator of human rights. So that's all, guys. Bye.